with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Erin Page.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. My name is Erin, and I am so honored to have today's guest here today. She's somebody who I've known about for a long time, who met in person just about a month or two ago, and I'm really excited to have her on. Welcome to the show, Kim Mack Rosenberg. She's the General Counsel for Children's Health Defense.
Thank you so much, Erin. I'm so excited to be here, and it was such a pleasure to meet you. I think it was beginning of September. Yeah.
Beginning of September. Yep. Well, okay. So first of all, one of the things that I often ask my guest is, how did you get involved with this work? Because I don't feel like any of us come into this, just feeling as if we're born to assist children with autism or special needs. I feel like most of us come here because of a personal story. So I'd love to hear yours.
Sure. So I have a young adult son now. He's 25. He'll be 26 in a few months. And he's diagnosed with autism. And he's pretty medically complicated, but he was vaccine injured as a toddler.
Yeah. And so now bringing you into the current, your current position with Children's Health Defense, what was that journey like for you? So had you always been an attorney? What did this journey look like for you?
Yeah, so I've been an attorney for longer than I would like to admit I've been an attorney. But I worked at a big firm where I did like products liability and insurance coverage litigation and that type of thing. And they were great and very generous when I had my son and we had issues and we were going to therapies and all of those kinds of things. They really were great. But I left that firm in 2014, practiced on my own for a while. And then I had a good friend who I had been on the board of a nonprofit with, and she and I were just talking one day. Mm-hmm. And she said, do you know anyone who would want to come work for me? And she did insurance coverage work, mostly for families of individuals with autism and also for the medical providers that they work with. And I was like, well, what about me? I'm kind of like trying to figure out, do I still even want to practice law? And it was a time when I knew I didn't want to go back to a big firm. Not a lot of nonprofits were hiring. So we're like, let's try it. If it's good, it's good. So I joined her firm and I became a partner a couple of years later. But I have been involved in the advocacy side of autism and special needs advocacy since probably about 2000, since before 2008, and really began advocating for my son and doing biomedical treatments and that type of thing since 2004. Mm-hmm. So I had worked with a lot of the people at Children's Health Defense over the years.
Right.
And had worked with Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, for years, have known him for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so when the opportunity came to get the general counsel position, I was super excited to do it because I've worked as outside counsel for Children's Health Defense before, and just the opportunity to really be involved day to day was really special. I mean, the mission of the organization, which is really to heal and save children, is, right, profoundly personal to me, but also I want other children, other young adults to heal as well and be protected from exposures, and also, future generations.
Yeah.
And when we heal the children, we're healing adults too.
Yeah. So we talk on the podcast a lot about the health side of things, but often I'm very acutely aware that there's a lot of legal sides to things, particularly when, patients are trying to receive care, opt out of care, various challenges that they might face. What kinds of things are you working on at Children's Health Defense that pertain maybe to individuals and their medical freedom?
Sure. So we work on a lot related to medical freedom and also censorship, which plays a huge role, people may not realize, in accessing your ability to exercise medical freedom. So we do cases on medical exemptions. We're working on, religious exemptions. We're working on challenging mandates themselves, because in my opinion, having a religious exemption, a philosophical exemption, a medical exemption is sort of a Band-Aid solution to the bigger issue of mandates and whether there should be vaccine mandates at all. So, at the heart of this is challenging those mandates, but also working on cases that we had a recent case that we supported brought by Ray Flores, who is one of our outside counsel, where he challenged HHS to actually abide by regulations that required them to have a vaccine safety commission and biannual reports to Congress. And their answer was due. And right before their answer was due, they made an announcement that that's exactly what they were going to do. So that was, really wonderful. And we've challenged, we've had lawsuits that challenge the COVID-19 mandates. We had a lawsuit that we supported that was Cardenas against the CDC, where a doctor in California who had a practice that was primarily, if not exclusively, patients who are Medicaid recipients. So some of our most economically challenged families, and she did not want to give COVID-19 vaccines to these children. And so she wasn't buying them from the Vaccines for Children program or receiving them for free from Vaccines for Children, which is a low or no cost way for doctors around the country to access vaccines through the CDC. Vaccines for Children canceled her contract, and then Medicaid canceled her contract. So it basically decimated her business, not be able to treat children in the way she felt was appropriate to treat them. And we see a lot of doctors having their licenses challenged or their livelihoods challenged when they speak out on these issues, and particularly with respect to treatments and interventions during the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw states like California issue regulations that said you basically can't say anything that's counter to the controlling narrative that, the COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective. Things like ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, other treatments don't work. You can't talk about them. You can't offer them to your patients. You can't speak about them generally publicly. So we've been involved in several lawsuits around doctor speech, but Children's Health Defense itself was really censored and continues to be censored. We're still deplatformed off of Facebook and Instagram, Meta and Instagram and YouTube. We are on X and I think we have a Rumble channel, but a lot of those huge platforms we're not on. So we actually brought lawsuits as well to try to regain our access to the social media marketplace. But also, a lot of people don't realize that part of the First Amendment that impacts freedom of speech is not just the freedom to share, to speak, to share your thoughts and your opinions, but we also have a freedom to receive that information. So as consumers of information, you and I have a right to have access to a variety of opinions. And what happened during the pandemic in particular is that the administration that was in power then, the Biden administration, was working with and strong-arming social media platforms to deplatform organizations such as Children's Health Defense. And there was a group of people who were put together, organizations and people called the Disinformation Dozen, CHD, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were part of that. A lot of other people. When it turns out, really, we were sharing very valuable, valid information that had been really rigorously fact-checked. And a lot of it now everyone's having to admit is true. But at the time, because we were so censored, information that countered the prevailing narrative wasn't reaching people. And when people can't get information, they can't really make informed decisions.
Right. So then is that the basis of some of your litigation, is trying to get the courts to acknowledge that the receipt of information was not occurring, or is the litigation focused on both sides of the argument?
It's both sides of the argument. So we had a case against Meta which unfortunately the Supreme Court declined to take in June. But
Mm,
we still have a case that was Kennedy v. Biden. It's now CHD against Trump,
hmm.
um, which is challenging both sides of that, right? It's both the
Right.
receipt of information and the sharing of information. And we have a case that's pending in the district court in the District of Columbia that we call the Trusted News Initiative case.
Hmm.
And the Trusted News Initiative was self-named by legacy media like the
Hmm.
BBC and Reuters and the Washington Post and many other legacy media outlets, where we have alleged that what they've done is engaged in a group boycott, which is illegal under US antitrust law. And it
Sure.
basically means that they're trying to shut out anyone who
Right.
they felt, was sharing a different opinion
Hmm.
with which they disagreed. So we're hitting the issue from a lot of different angles. And we've also had some really great success recently in medical exemptions in New York State.
Nice.
We had a case called Doe v. Oceanside, where a young girl um, had a religious exemption, was taken away in New York in 2019, really wanted to go back to school
Mm,
and was vaccinated and had some very serious adverse reactions.
sure.
And it was so bad that she actually had 7 medical exemptions
Wow.
from doctors, and most of them were rejected. One was a very short one, I believe, that the school accepted for a very short period of time.
Hmm.
But most of them were rejected. She
Hmm.
even had gone to like an urgent care,
Mm,
and because she had an anaphylactic rash, they said, we're not gonna vaccinate you. So what she was essentially missing was one hepatitis B vaccine.
mm,
And they were refusing to let her into school without that vaccine, even though children who have active hepatitis B
hmm.
are legally protected and entitled to go to school. And I think
Right.
they should be. There's no reason those children can't go to school,
Sure.
but someone who does not have, is not in an active disease state, is not infected with hepatitis, but was missing one shot, was not
Hmm.
allowed to attend school.
Hmm.
So we recently, Sujata Gibson and Chad Davenport, who are lawyers we work with in New York,
Hmm.
recently obtained an injunction, and that girl is back in school. So it's
Nice.
really exciting. Yeah, we're really happy for her. But
Hmm.
again, that the exemptions are a Band-Aid solution to the bigger problem of mandates.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I find all of these conversations about censorship so interesting because, um, when I first started the podcast 3 years ago, there were a few interviews that I had uploaded that then got taken down and I got strikes for all of those. It got to the point where I just decided that I wasn't going to continue to upload to YouTube. And that's really what happens to people that, are speaking the truth, that are, don't have the resources to, put on these big lawsuits and things like that. So, um, I guess my point is I want to say thank you for what you guys are doing because it enables people like me to be able to continue spreading truth without fear of constant repercussions from the powers that be that make someone, a smaller creator like myself feel completely powerless. So I really do appreciate what you guys do.
Well, and we do it, not just for CHD, but as you said, for creators like you and others in the marketplace, because it's not even necessarily that I'm only wanting to help people whose speech I agree with. In fact,
Right.
if the First Amendment would be easy if it was just speech everyone agreed with, it's really there for the harder issues. It's for things that people may not disagree with. It may be a minority viewpoint. It may be an unpopular opinion. But
Yeah.
it's important that we have that free exchange of ideas.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Okay, so where are we at currently with mandates? Because and I could be wrong on this, but I just read that there's a new mandate in Santa Cruz County in California, a new mask mandate, particularly in healthcare settings, from my understanding. I could be wrong on this, but um, you know, to me, too often when those in power import certain mandates on their citizens, they are not rolled back. So when I see things like this continuing in California, for example, um, that becomes a very slippery slope. So as I see those things happening, what kinds of things do you see when you see some of these, even just local municipalities trying to enforce mandates like that?
I do worry about it. And I'm not familiar with the Santa Cruz mandate in particular, but I have been reading about mandates popping back up for mask wearing
Hmm.
in California, in particular. And I do worry about it because one, we know the science is not there to support doing it.
Right, right.
But people still believe that the science supports it. I see arguments like that on social media
Hmm.
all the
Hmm.
time. But it is a slippery slope,
Yeah.
100%. And the executive orders that were all in place in every state at the beginning of 2020 are very concerning because it's an
Hmm.
exercise of power that's really, um, I feel like in my time, unprecedented.
Sure.
Never had seen anything like that. And there are some people who are saying, well, now COVID's over and it's okay. But we still have the PrEP Act in place, which really offers, as you probably know, liability protection to the manufacturers of what they call covered countermeasures. So
Hmm.
once an order is issued that something is a covered countermeasure, the manufacturers are basically shielded from liability, as are the people who administer it. And it's not
Hmm.
just vaccines, it was ventilators and remdesivir and other treatments that end up on these covered countermeasures lists. And people don't realize that they essentially have no recourse
Hmm.
if
Hmm.
something happens to them. There's a program, when you have a vaccine injury for a non-COVID vaccine, a vaccine that's on the childhood schedule, there's the vaccine injury compensation program, which is fraught with problems.
Yeah.
It's a broken system, but the countermeasures injury compensation program is even worse.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a little bit of a black hole that you
Hmm.
apply to.
Hmm.
You have to apply within a year of the administration of the covered countermeasure. So it's a very short statute of limitations.
Right.
They don't pay attorney's fees the way the vaccine injury compensation program does. And it's kind of like Medicaid for those who have been injured by covered countermeasures. It's the payer of last resort.
Mm.
So you can only apply to be paid what your insurance or other sources of repayment have not paid.
Hmm.
And you can only go into the program if you have a serious injury and serious or death. And those are pretty narrowly defined. Serious
Hmm.
injury is pretty narrowly defined. So there are a lot of people who are just excluded completely
Right.
from any recourse.
Right. And to date, do you know what the payouts have been, or is there still people just kind of caught up in bureaucracy at this point?
So there have been some payouts. Most of them are very small. We're talking
Hmm.
$1,000, $1,500.
Hmm.
There have been a couple of larger payouts,
Hmm.
but most have been very small, and there have been very few, relatively speaking, compared to the number of applications that have gone in. There's a lot just sitting there,
Hmm.
again, not being addressed by this program.
Yeah. So, you know, I I don't know that we've even really talked too much about on the podcast the vaccine injury compensation program in general, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the nitty-gritty when it comes to statute of limitations and how essentially the it's Joe Smith versus the US government. So um, tell us a little bit about how that process works or doesn't work, and what kinds of things that people are facing once they do come up against what is suspected even by their doctors as a vaccine injury.
Sure. So for the vaccine injury compensation program, and again, that's all the vaccines that are on the childhood schedule. You can have been an adult. So the flu vaccine, for example, is on the childhood schedule.
Right.
But if an adult has a flu vaccine injury, they have to go into the program as well. There are other vaccines that are not on the childhood schedule, like the shingles vaccine. That the manufacturers can be sued, and they have been sued over those. But most vaccines are somewhere on the childhood schedule. And what the act does, we often call it the 86 Act for short,
Right.
because it was signed into law in 1986 and went into effect in 1988. It shields the manufacturers and people who administer vaccines from liability. And it's funded by an excise tax on every vaccine administered in the United States. And what it says is basically, if you're injured or you believe you've been injured, you have to make a petition to the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. It is not a court. It does not have judges. It has individuals who are special masters who make these decisions. There's no jury. You don't have a right to a jury trial. You have to apply within 3 years of the onset of first symptom, or I believe the statute of limitations is 2 years for a death. You don't have to have known that you had a symptom. The symptom just had to be there. You didn't have to connect it to a vaccine. So a lot of people end up outside that statute of limitations when they think they're going to make a petition, and they get all their medical records together, and you look at the medical records and there's some notation in those records that's beyond the 3 years, and it precludes you from filing because your pediatrician or other doctor just happened to make a notation.
Including, so I could be wrong on this, but from my understanding, if the diagnosis is autism, is that excluded from the vaccine injury compensation program?
So what happened was that there was what they called the omnibus autism proceeding, and that went on for a very long time. Almost all autism cases ended up in that proceeding, and most of those were dismissed. There were, it's complicated, but there were a series of test cases that they used to kind of rule on the other cases. There are cases that have been compensated, and there's been law review article written about it. Mary Holland and others worked on this. Cases where individuals have a lot of the same symptoms that we see with autism, and maybe even eventually are diagnosed with autism, who are compensated in the program. But it's very, very difficult. And the program has what are called table injuries and non-table injuries. The program was set up to be sort of a non-adversarial way of compensating people. And it's turned into a very adversarial proceeding, even with table injuries. So the table is a list of the vaccines, a list of injuries that are associated with the vaccines. It's a very limited number, and it's by vaccine, and then a time period in which that injury has to manifest itself. So you have to have this vaccine, this injury within this period of time. So it could be something like, whatever vaccine, encephalopathy, swelling of the brain within 72 hours. If you're outside that injury period, you're off table. But even the table cases, they fight over, you may not be fighting over the injury itself, but you're fighting over what the compensation could be. And it can be very dehumanizing, the program. They'll bring in life planners. If you have, someone who's now an adult and you've been fighting for years in the program, and they're injured, and one of their injuries results in them not having continence. You're sometimes fighting with a life planner over how many diapers an adult needs every day. And that's just, it's awful. It is awful. And if you're a non-table injury, it becomes much, much more contentious. So you're having most people have a lawyer. You're hiring expert witnesses to come in. The expert witnesses are often ripped apart by the special masters. It's not pretty in the program. A lot of the cases but some cases do get compensated. A lot of the cases that get compensated are things like SIRVA, so a shoulder injury, right, from an improper administration of a vaccine. But there have been some bigger cases that have been compensated, including autism cases.
Yeah.
The case of Hannah Poling is a really well-known
Right.
case. And her family was compensated. So
Mhm.
it's not unheard of. It's just very,
Right.
very difficult. And there are other conditions that, again, are not generally well received in the program. So, for example, sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS,
Right. Right.
very difficult to bring a SIDS case and get a SIDS case through
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
program. You can leave the program if you can reject an award. You can opt out after if your case hasn't been resolved in a certain number of days. If you get a negative reward, you can go to federal court or state
Mhm.
court, but you have to sit in the program for quite a period of time before you can leave. And
Mhm.
if you opt out, you're really limited right now to issues where there's where you have allegations of fraud primarily.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you're not just starting all over. You need a much, and then you can sue the manufacturer, right? Because you're not
Right.
suing the manufacturer in the program. You're suing the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. But it's very difficult to get cases out of the
Mhm.
program and brought in court. There are movements to change that. There's a bill that Representative Gosar has that's he introduced last session,
Mhm.
and I believe it's being reintroduced this session to revamp the program.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and we know it's an issue that this administration cares about. So, we're following it very, very closely.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there have been some bills in places like bills or laws passed in places like Florida,
Mhm.
lifting mandates.
Mhm.
Idaho has a Health Freedom Act that was just passed into law. So there are some exciting things happening on the state level too.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, so I know that there's some controversy surrounding the beginnings of the 1986 Act, which I think was initially done in somewhat in good faith, and then from my understanding, the entire thing was kind of uh, taken over by pharma and unfortunately became what it is today. But they did have safety precautions in place and those kinds of things. They were supposed to have these meetings and follow all this data and all of these kinds of things, which never happened. So, in your mind, what do you see as, some of the potential fixes for what's currently in place, or do we need to completely revamp everything and start over?
I think there's a lot of controversy there because you're
Yeah,
right. There are some people who say we just need to get rid of the program and
right,
start over. There are other people who say, no, let's see if we can fix what's here.
right.
Theoretically, as you pointed out, like the idea of a compensation program that's non-adversarial and can provide some compensation to people who have been injured is not necessarily a bad thing. It's
Sure.
just, it's turned into something different than I think what a lot of the people who worked on the act in the 1980s thought it was going to be.
Sure.
And during that time period, the manufacturers of the vaccines were saying, well, if we have liability, we're not going to stay in business. We're not going to produce your vaccines. We're just going to stop vaccine production.
Hmm.
Um, and that's very much a fear tactic because we know, looking at, it's not as if there's going to be a sudden resurgence in all these diseases against which we vaccinate.
Right.
Um, if the vaccines even went away, because when you look at the statistics, you know that from the turn of the 19, when 1900 came along and you start tracking from there, you see that the rates of mortality from all these diseases are going down, 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 down
Right.
very steadily before the introduction of any vaccine. And they sort
Hmm.
of follow the same trajectory as diseases we don't vaccinate against and never have, like scarlet fever and
Hmm.
um, things like that. So what's causing all these mortality from all these diseases go down? It's better public health measures. It's, clean running water. It's, we don't have horses in the streets all the time anymore. We have refrigeration. We have better nutrition. Now we
Hmm.
can talk about the better nutrition as, now maybe not so
Sure.
much, but you had refrigeration, you had other measures that, people were washing their hands more. I mean, just taking, basic health measures. That was what was really resulting in the decreased mortality.
Right.
And that's actually information HHS just put out a video with the secretary last week or the week before with that information. But we've been using those graphs for a long time.
Right.
So people who've seen me speak have seen me use those graphs. And it's really telling. And people, there's this idea that some people have that, well, we have to have vaccines of vaccinated against these diseases or everyone's going to be sick all the time. There's so many things that are out there that no one's developed a vaccine or they haven't marketed a vaccine for yet. And people forget about that, right? You get a cold, you get, babies get all kinds of things, right?
Sure.
Toddlers, kids, they come down with, and we don't have vaccines for them. Little kids are in school, they spread stuff around. I mean, it's just the nature of being human. So, I think it's a little bit of a red herring too, when we see people saying, because you're not getting your vaccines, my immune compromised child can't go to school. I have an immune compromised child. So, and I've never said that in my life.
Right.
Because it's this fallacy that if everyone were completely vaccinated with all the vaccines that are on the schedule, that their child would be protected, but they're not protected from all the things. Even if the vaccines were 100% effective, they're not protected from all the other things that we've never vaccinated against. And it's unfortunate. I mean, being immune compromised is not necessarily a fun thing, but the fallacy that everyone's protected if you do that it's just not true. And when you think about it critically, you realize that. And there are other measures, obviously, people can take to protect themselves.
Well, and there are even vaccines now that are expressly not to prevent transmission, like the COVID-19 vaccine. So if that's the argument, that just falls apart when you realize that the vaccine itself is not designed to prevent transmission.
And that's true for a number
Right.
of vaccines that are on the childhood schedule. So at best, you may be getting some protection for yourself.
Sure.
But we know that, for example, with whooping cough,
when
there are big whooping cough outbreaks, often they are attributed to people who are vaccinated spreading whooping cough. It's not necessarily the unvaccinated people who are spreading whooping cough. When I was involved in litigation in California in 2015-16, when they took away the philosophical exemptions in California, one of the facts that we had was that, and this was from the California Department of Health, something like in that year, the year before, the last year data was collected, 90% of whooping cough cases were in vaccinated individuals. 90%.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the unvaccinated who were getting and spreading whooping cough.
Right. And it becomes this circular argument, I think, because so many people, like Aaron Siri's new book, Vaccines, Amen, to me, it's like, it's perfect because that's exactly what it is. It's almost a religious ideology that these people, unfortunately, are almost blinded by the actual data and science, even though they say to trust the science.
Right.
But which, I don't know. It's a false dichotomy. I can never get my head around. I don't understand that.
Well, and this idea that science is ever settled, right? That there's, science is constantly moving, and it should be. We should be challenging what we believe and doing new and better science to try to get at resolutions. But yes, there is almost a religious fervor surrounding it, as if, it is the only thing that's protecting public health in the United States and around the world. And that's just simply not true. And in fact, we know that it can cause a lot of very serious problems for individuals. And there's also the underlying, kind of the soft injuries that you don't necessarily see that are not as obvious, because we have decline in IQ and things like that people have not been paying as much attention to as I think they need to.
Well, and especially when you vaccinate babies on day one of life, when you vaccinate mothers during
Hmm.
pregnancy, you create a new baseline altogether, and it's very, very difficult to kind of parse out what is vaccine injury when they've been vaccinated since, they were in the womb.
Yeah,
So,
no, exactly. So when people say to me, I know my child is not vaccine injured
mhm.
because they were this way from the day they were born. And I say, well, did they get a hepatitis B vaccine and a vitamin K shot?
Right.
And did you happen to get a DTaP or a flu shot or, an MMR? What happened? So is your child, maybe, maybe not. I can't say definitively, for every individual,
Sure.
obviously, but I don't think you can also just dismiss it
Right.
out of hand because of the way we administer vaccines.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's almost purposeful.
But we also know there are communities out there that have much lower rates of vaccination, and we can look at those communities
Yeah.
to see what their health status is like. And to me, ultimately, it should be a personal decision. That's what health freedom is about.
Right.
And if I want the ability to choose not to take a vaccine or not to take a medication or use some intervention, I also want the people who I would like people to make informed choices and have true, free, and prior informed consent, which is why censorship is so bad. But I would ultimately like people to be able to make their own decisions too and do what's right for themselves
Right.
and their families. I may not agree with what they think is right. They may not agree with me, but that's where, the freedom is. The freedom is to make that choice.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I think a lot of times, I know those of us who've kind of been in this medical freedom space for a long time, pre-COVID in
Mm-hmm.
particular, have had conversations with people that become very contentious and challenging because they're stuck in that religious ideology that even data and science cannot overcome those particular arguments because there's just an unwillingness even to look at it, or there's a discrediting of, oh, that particular study, I don't agree with it, or, um, so how do you overcome that in the legal space when you're up against, in my mind, people like this who have this ideology and who really have more of an unwillingness to even dive into some of the data?
It can be hard. And I mean, I'm sure you've, seen and read about and heard about, a lot of cases brought during COVID that were
Mhm.
not successful, particularly
Sure.
cases brought very early on.
Right.
Because, I mean, part of this, I think, judges are people too. Sometimes we forget that,
Mm.
but they are human. And they were all scared. And, they tend to, not all of them, there are plenty of young judges, but it tends to skew to an older age range. They're hearing about, elderly people getting sick and dying as if they're
Mhm.
just, dropping dead on the street. Also that, you're putting grandmothers at risk, grandfathers and people in nursing homes are at risk. No one wants to be the judge who says it's okay to do things that are going to kill grandma or that they're being
Right.
told are going to kill grandma. So I think, there's a big psychological piece there. And I think
Mhm.
that's changing too, though,
Mhm.
and I'm hoping that as it changes, that we can sort of capture and keep that momentum and build that momentum. So when the next thing comes along, because, you know, COVID, I think, now it's kind of like a cold or a flu. It's going to be around. It's just something that's going to be around, but there's going to be something else. There's
Right.
going to be something else that came, they tried it with monkeypox
Mhm. Mhm.
and that did not catch on, I think, the way they hoped it would. Though in my lovely current home state of New Jersey, we
Mhm.
still have Mpox vaccine ads on TV.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
they're not giving up. But there's going to be something else that comes along. I mean, we
Mhm.
see some of the, the big names in um, who were speaking out during COVID in the pro-vaccine, anti-ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine treatment
Mhm.
group, like Bill Gates. You
Mhm.
hear allusions to the next thing
Sure.
coming down the pike. And, we see these games that they do, literally, they're games designed to engineer what happens in a pandemic and
Mhm.
how a response is rolled out. And we see what the UN is trying to do and WHO is trying to do in co-opting even nations' freedom to be able to respond to something in a way that they independently want to do.
I mean, even going as far as changing the definition of pandemic, for
Mm-hmm.
example, so that we get to the point now where a pandemic can be essentially anything that they declare.
Right.
Uh,
And, I saw something on X the other day, just a couple days ago, that was full-blown measles outbreak in either North or South Carolina. And I thought, oh, full-blown measles outbreak. Okay, let's see. And whoever posted said, thank you, all you anti-vaxxers. And I'm like, well, what's a full-blown outbreak? There
yeah.
were 8 cases of measles.
Mm.
There were no deaths. They were everyone seemed to be just fine. And I
Mhm.
remember my late dad asked me in 2015 when there was the measles outbreak, primarily in California.
Right.
Um, he said, he was living in Florida at the time. He's like, it's on the news all the time. They're talking about all these measles and people are getting measles and, it's terrible. Measles is deadly. He said, is this the same measles I had as a kid? I'm like, it is. It's the same measles. He said, what is all this fuss about?
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
understand. Shel Silverstein wrote poems about how great it was to have the measles and you get to
Yeah.
stay in bed and eat ice cream, right? And
Right.
now it's like killing everyone. And they're sort of the mainstream media, et cetera, are actually pushing a false narrative with respect to the measles. We know, they're claiming there were 3 measles deaths in Texas
Mhm. Mhm.
during an outbreak earlier this year.
Yeah.
And we know that at least 2 of those, I just don't have the information on the third, but we
Mhm.
know with at least 2 of those,
Mhm.
the children did not die from measles.
Mhm.
They died
Mhm.
from hospital error.
Right.
But no one wants to admit that.
Mhm.
Um, and that needs to be looked at, right? I mean, such
Right.
a huge percentage of deaths in this country are attributable to
Mhm.
hospital error. The hospital is not necessarily a place people will say it's not the place you want to go when you're sick.
Right.
And it's, but they don't want to acknowledge that error because they can pin it for a lot of reasons, right? Liability too.
Right.
But,
Right.
they've got a measles case. It's very easy to blame
Right.
measles for
Right.
that death, even when it's not accurate. But we had, Children's Health Defense worked with Dr. Pierre Corey and with
Uh-huh.
Brian Hooker, who's our chief scientific officer, and others who examined those, Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, who examined those medical records
Mhm.
and were
Mhm.
able to show very, very clearly and cogently what actually happened
Mhm.
to those
Mhm.
children.
Mhm. Yeah. It's difficult, it's like turning the Titanic around,
It
right?
is because, well, and you are dealing with a religion, and now we're dealing with, I think, the other big piece of it, and again, it goes back to censorship and the exchange of ideas.
Hmm.
It worries me for the up and coming generation
Yeah.
of, children now and young adults now who are not getting exposed to a lot of information where they can critically weigh
Hmm.
different opinions and form their own opinion and their own
Hmm.
belief, but they're just not being taught to think critically. They're
Right.
being taught, this is the way it's going to be. COVID vaccines are good. Everyone should
Hmm.
get vaccinated. COVID
Hmm.
vaccines are good. And they just accept that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so it really worries me, the lack of critical thinking, because it's not just vaccines, it's everything. Your inability to
Right.
think critically um, impacts every aspect of your life.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it kind of brings us full circle with that conversation about censorship, and I mean, um, the U.S. government has admitted to censoring true information that they deemed some kind of ulterior motive was involved, and called it malinformation, which to me that's, you know, I can't assume anybody's motivation. Even, the president of the United States, when Biden was telling everybody that, they were all going to die if they were unvaccinated, like
Right. It was going to be it was going to be our long, dark winter, right?
Yes, right. Perhaps he really thought that was true. I don't know. I mean, I can presume that. I don't think he would have said it otherwise. But I don't think it was malintended necessarily. So to presume the intent of somebody who is trying to assist others by sharing information that is true accounts, for example, of people who had been injured by the COVID-19 vaccine, for example,
Hmm.
these kinds of conversations being stomped out by, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or X or the president of the United States. Really, I mean, I could care less who's the one administering it. We just can't have that in order to have honest, open conversations moving forward.
100% right. And, the government can't censor speech in the way that we saw it. It violates the First Amendment. So that's why they were using social media to
Hmm.
do the censoring, but that it's
Hmm.
not permissible to use social media that way. But we've seen the receipts, as they
Right.
say, right?
Right.
Like we have seen the emails from the White House
Hmm.
to Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and everyone telling them and really saying, we can bring down, we're going to put pressure on you so that you're going to lose your protections that you have under federal law if you
Hmm.
don't do something about this. And now we've
Hmm.
seen letters from YouTube and from Mark Zuckerberg at Meta basically admitting
Hmm.
to having done this. They couch it very carefully, but when you
Sure.
read between the lines, it's very obvious, what they're saying, and that they gave into these pressures from the US government,
Right.
impermissibly asking them to censor. It's basically using them as a proxy to do what they themselves can't do as the government.
Well, and I mean, and I don't know. And to me, it's like it would make sense for someone like Mark Zuckerberg to then sue the U.S. government for coercion.
He
But
hasn't gone that far yet, um but so many people, and you hear about the bigger names, you hear about Children's Health Defense, or I'm thinking of some of the other plaintiffs in the Trusted News Initiative case,
Sure.
Dr. Ben Tapper
Yeah.
and Dr. Mercola. There are lots of names, lots of plaintiffs in that case. So you hear about the big names that are taken down, but like you said, there's pressure then on you when you get dinged by someone like YouTube for uploading a video.
Right.
And eventually you're like, well, do you start even, and some people do, some people don't, start self-censoring, saying, well, if I put
Right.
this up, then everything I've worked really hard for may disappear.
Right. Right.
And that's not a comfortable position to be in either.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it got to the point where I just decided to stop uploading on YouTube. They never pulled my channel down, but I just decided it's not worth my time because if I do, it'll probably get pulled down anyway, and then I'll lose my channel altogether. So,
Hmm.
I might as well seek other avenues, which is what I eventually did. But, I mean, it just, excuse me. Like you said, it just gets to the point where you start to self-censor because, not necessarily because you don't think people deserve to hear the truth, but because you fear that they won't hear the truth if you put, specific messages out there. So people hide them behind paywalls, for example, and that makes
Hmm.
them less accessible for, the majority of the public.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's sometimes just how these conversations ever get had is that we have to do them behind closed doors, and that's a form of censorship in and of itself, right?
And we have seen, on the plus side, try to look for silver linings and be a positive person.
Yeah.
I mean, the big social media giants, for better or for worse, are still really important in getting information out, right? Meta and Instagram, YouTube, X. But there have been new sources that have come out too, right? Like Substack
Right.
is,
Right.
Substack has grown tremendously, but as you said, some of those pages are behind paywalls.
Right.
But there really is an exchange of a lot of really fascinating. If I can't read all the Substacks I want to read
Right.
every day.
Right.
And CHD's Defender has a Substack too, and we put out our newsletter daily to our mailing list.
Yeah.
But, we've lost, at least now, the power to use Meta, for example, to say,
Mhm.
hey, check out, today's news. We are still
Right.
very active on X, and very grateful for that. But, Instagram and Facebook are pretty key too. And
Right.
there are some obviously other social media outlets too, but those are kind of the giants.
Mm-hmm.
And we lost our YouTube channel, and
Right.
so
Right.
we're continuing to try to push the word out. And we have, if I can do a little shameless plug,
Yeah, absolutely.
we do have a conference coming up in Austin, Texas,
Mhm.
November 7th through the 9th. And the conference is called Moment of Truth, which is why I brought
Yeah.
it up now, because it's really about talking about these issues. And we have an incredible lineup of speakers who are coming. I can't even name them all. We've got Senators Rand Paul and Ron Johnson coming. We have Suzanne Humphreys. We have Dr. Joseph Ladapo from Florida, the Surgeon General of Florida. We have Russell Brand, Andy Wakefield, Peter McCullough,
Mhm.
Catherine Austin Fitz, Brett Weinstein. I mean, it's just going to be, I could, Sherry Tenpenny, the list just goes on and on and on. We're going to have like essentially two full action-packed days
Yeah.
of information sharing. And also just for any of the, a conference like CHD's conference, it's also just really nice to be amongst people with whom you share certain core values.
Absolutely. I think that's what I was going to say is it's so valuable to be able to be in the room with the people who are truly supportive and you don't have to self-censor in front of.
And even if
Wonderful.
you say something someone disagrees with, it's great because you can usually have a conversation about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. All right, Kim. So, at the end of every single podcast, I ask all of our guests 8 rapid fire questions. These questions are just designed to give us a little bit more insight into who you are and what makes you tick. So, are you
Okay,
ready?
I am ready.
All right, number one. If you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Oil of oregano. I use oil of
Ooh,
oregano all the time.
nice. Very cool. All right, number two. Tell us something most people don't know about you.
I cannot sing at all. And when I was in high school, I wanted to be in the choir. And I went to a Catholic all-girls school, and the sister who ran the choir did, didn't want to tell me I couldn't be in choir, but told me I could be in choir, but had to lip sync.
Well, that's very funny considering you and I think, did karaoke
We
at
did.
the mass.
To me, I have not watched the video of the karaoke. I don't want
No,
to see it.
me neither. So- All right, number three. If I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
Oh gosh. Happy music, listening to all the dark stuff. Um, trying to think of what is really, how about Don't Worry, Be Happy?
Nice. Yeah, you might be the second person to say that. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen. All
I think
right.
about like all my favorite songs, and I'm like,
Yeah.
none of those are very happy.
All right, number four. What's your favorite guilty pleasure?
Really, well, let's see. My favorite guilty pleasure. So I'll take a lot of heat for this one. Foie gras. I love foie gras.
Awesome. All right, number 5. What is the most influential book you've ever read?
This is going to sound really trite, but the Bible.
Mm-hmm. No, all right, number 6. What does the word revolution mean to you?
Revolution means change, constant change. It doesn't have to be a revolution that is, here's the start and here's the end of it. I think to a certain extent, we should be in a constant state of revolution because it's a state of evolution.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. What does the word remedy mean to you?
Remedy means getting at root causes and resolving those root causes in order to resolve whatever symptoms we have.
Absolutely. All right. And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
To think for yourself and gather as much information as you can when you make a decision, and don't be afraid to stand in your power with that decision.
Absolutely. All right. So one more time, where can people go to register for the conference?
So they can go to childrenshealthdefense.org, and on our banner there's a click through where you can register. And today's actually the last day of early bird registration, but registrations are still available, and we look forward to seeing people in Austin.
Absolutely. Well, I'm here. All right,
Very
Sean.
excited to see you.
All right, Kim, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you all for listening. I hope to see you all very soon, and take care until next time.
With hope as a guiding light.